The moment I signed the divorce papers, I quietly cut off everything she depended on. While she was celebrating a luxury wedding with her new man, one message from me made her world stop. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Lucas Hartman never raised his voice. That was his flaw, according to Vanessa. The evening light filtered through the kitchen window of their two-story house in Harrison Township, Michigan, casting amber streaks across the linoleum floor. Outside, the lake rippled in the October wind, the same lake Lucas had grown up beside, the same shoreline where his father had taught him to fish on Saturday mornings before the sun fully rose. Inside, the house smelled of microwaved leftovers and fabric softener. Ordinary smells for an ordinary Tuesday. Lucas stood at the counter, sorting through the mail. Electric bill, water bill, a reminder about his son's upcoming field trip. He set aside a check for $20, making a mental note to sign the permission slip before morning. Behind him, the dryer hummed its familiar rhythm, and he could hear Vanessa in the living room, pulling warm clothes into the basket with sharp, impatient movements. He worked logistics for a regional shipping company, the kind of job that required spreadsheets and phone calls and patience with people who forgot their delivery windows. It wasn't glamorous. The office had fluorescent lighting that hummed too loud and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. But it was stable. The checks cleared. The insurance covered the family. His boss respected him enough to offer him more responsibility, which meant more problems to solve, but roughly the same paycheck. Lucas didn't mind. He'd never been the kind of man who needed his worth reflected in a title. He coached his son's little league team on weekends, standing in the spring dust and teaching 9-year-olds how to keep their eye on the ball, how to swing through instead of pulling back at the last second. He paid bills 2 weeks early because his mother had taught him that staying ahead meant sleeping better. He remembered birthdays, not just his kids, but his parents, his sisters, even Vanessa's mother's, though she never seemed to notice the cards he sent. His life had a rhythm, a structure. Vanessa called it suffocating. "You're satisfied with too little," she said that night, her voice flat as she folded a towel with mechanical precision. She didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on the laundry, her hands smoothing wrinkles that weren't there. "Your whole family is." Lucas set down the mail. He turned toward her, watching the way her jaw tightened, the way her shoulders stayed rigid even as she performed such a mundane task. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that had gone slightly messy throughout the day. She looked tired. She always looked tired lately, though Lucas couldn't quite pinpoint when that had started. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his tone even. He'd learned over the years that Vanessa needed space to say what she really meant, that pushing her only made her retreat. "I mean exactly what I said." She dropped the towel into the basket and reached for another. "You're happy here, in this house, with this job. You don't want more." "I want what's stable," Lucas replied. "What's real?" Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Stable, right? That's the word you use when you're too scared to take risks." The sentence hung in the air between them like smoke. Lucas felt something shift in his chest. Not anger exactly, but a kind of resigned understanding. This wasn't the first time she'd said something like this. It probably wouldn't be the last. But that particular sentence stuck with him. Not because it was cruel. Vanessa had said crueler things over the years, often late at night when exhaustion stripped away her filters, but because she meant it. She believed, genuinely, that his satisfaction with their life was a character flaw, that his parents' contentment was something to be ashamed of. Vanessa came from a family that measured everything in comparisons. Her sister had married a man who worked in finance, someone who wore tailored suits and drove a car with heated seats. They lived in a suburb with a name that sounded expensive, where the lawns were maintained by services and the holiday decorations came from catalogs. Vanessa's mother posted their family photos on Facebook with captions about being blessed and grateful, words that rang hollow when Lucas saw how she looked at his own parents. His mother, Marla, had worked at the automotive parts factory for 30 years. His father had done the same until his back gave out and forced him into early retirement. They lived simply, casseroles when someone got sick, hand-me-down furniture that still worked fine, birthday cakes made from scratch instead of ordered from bakeries. Vanessa had stopped coming to those family dinners 6 months ago. At first, she made excuses. Headaches, work projects, the kids' homework. Lucas hadn't pushed. He'd taken the children himself, sat at his parents' table, and explained that Vanessa was just busy. His mother had nodded, but her eyes held something sad and knowing. Now, watching his wife fold laundry with the same mechanical resentment she seemed to apply to everything about their life, Lucas understood the truth. Vanessa didn't just dislike their routine. She hated it. She hated him for accepting it. And she hated his family for modeling a kind of happiness she couldn't access. The kids need baths, Lucas said quietly, choosing not to engage further. Arguments with Vanessa had become circular, exhausting exercises in defending choices he didn't regret. I'll take care of it. Of course you will, she muttered, reaching for another towel. Lucas walked upstairs, each step creaking in familiar places. He could hear his daughter singing to herself in her room, some pop song she'd learned at school, and his son's video game beeping through the closed door. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. He paused at the top of the stairs, his hand resting on the banister his father had helped him sand and refinish 3 summers ago. It's been a whole weekend on it, working in companionable silence, the smell of wood stain thick in the air. His father had shown him how to work with the grain, how to be patient, how to build something that would last. Lucas wondered if Vanessa had ever understood that kind of value. Thanksgiving arrived with the kind of cold that made the lake freeze at the edges. Lucas's mother, Marla, had been cooking since dawn, the house filled with warmth and sound. The oven timer chiming, pots simmering on the stove, his father shouting updates about the football game from the living room. Lucas arrived early with the kids, letting them run inside while he carried the pumpkin pies Marla had requested he pick up from the bakery on his way. Vanessa coming? His mother asked as she basted the turkey, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen. She said she'd be here by 2, Lucas replied, setting the pies on the counter. It was almost 3 when Vanessa's car pulled into the driveway. Lucas watched from the window as she sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at her phone, her face illuminated by the blue light. She was scrolling through something, social media, probably, or messages from friends whose Thanksgiving spreads looked more Instagram-worthy than this one. When she finally came inside, she didn't apologize for being late. She handed her coat to Lucas without looking at him and walked into the kitchen where his mother was setting out serving dishes. "Smells good," Vanessa said, the words automatic and empty. The table was crowded. Lucas's parents, his sister Julie and her husband, their 2 kids, and Vanessa and Lucas's own children. 13 people packed around a table meant for 10, elbows bumping, voices overlapping. The kind of chaos that made Lucas feel grounded. The kind that made Vanessa's jaw tighten. His father said grace, a simple, earnest prayer about gratitude and family. Vanessa's lips barely moved. The divorce conversation happened on a Thursday night in February. Snow fell outside, muffling the usual sounds of the neighborhood. The kids were asleep upstairs. Lucas had made sure of it, checking on them twice before coming back downstairs. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten breakfast that morning, where Lucas had helped his daughter with her math homework the night before, where thousands of ordinary moments had accumulated into a marriage. Vanessa had her hands folded in front of her, her posture straight. She'd been planning this, Lucas realized. Rehearsing it. "I met someone," she said. Lucas nodded slowly. He wasn't surprised. There had been signs, late nights at work that didn't match her schedule, new attention to her appearance, a distance that went beyond their usual tension. He hadn't confronted her about it because, truthfully, he wasn't sure it mattered anymore. "He sees my potential," Vanessa continued. "He believes I can be more than this." "More than what?" Lucas asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "More than a medical receptionist married to a logistics coordinator in a town where nothing ever changes." Lucas absorbed this. The kitchen faucet dripped, a sound he'd been meaning to fix for weeks. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a snowplow scraped down their street. "Okay," he said. Vanessa frowned. "Okay, that's all you have to say. What do you want me to say?" Lucas looked at her directly. Do you want me to beg you to stay? To fight for this? She didn't answer immediately. Maybe some part of her had expected drama, anger, tears. But Lucas had learned over the years that Vanessa thrived on reaction, that giving her an emotional response only fueled whatever narrative she constructed. I want a divorce, she said. I know, Lucas replied. I'll make it easy. And he did. What Vanessa didn't realize, what she'd never paid attention to during their 9 years of marriage, was that Lucas had been handling nearly everything quietly the entire time. He'd opened college savings accounts for both kids when they were born, contributing every month even when money was tight. Not much, $50 here, $100 there, but consistent. Compound interest doing its patient work. He'd managed all the utilities, set them up on autopay, ensured nothing ever got shut off or went to collections. He'd handled the insurance, car, home life, health. He'd read through the policies, understood the coverage, filed the claims when necessary. He'd quietly helped Vanessa's parents when they'd struggled financially 2 years ago, writing a check for $3,000 to cover their property taxes when they'd fallen behind. Vanessa had never known. Her father had called Lucas directly, embarrassed, and Lucas had simply handled it. He hadn't mentioned it to Vanessa because he knew she'd either feel obligated or resentful, and neither seemed useful. He'd maintained relationships with everyone who mattered, sending cards, making calls, showing up when people needed him. None of it was flashy. None of it came with recognition or praise. But all of it was documented. All of it was real. When they sat down with lawyers, Lucas came prepared. He had spreadsheets showing his financial contributions. He had emails and text messages demonstrating his consistent presence in their children's lives. He had character references from coaches, teachers, neighbors. Vanessa came with anger and assumptions. The divorce was finalized quickly. Lucas didn't fight for the house. He let her have it, knowing the mortgage would become her problem. He didn't argue about asset division beyond protecting the kids' college funds. He asked for equal custody, and when Vanessa's lawyer pushed back, Lucas's lawyer quietly presented evidence of his involvement in every aspect of their children's daily lives. They settled. Vanessa left the final meeting feeling victorious. She'd gotten the house. She'd gotten child support that seemed reasonable. She'd gotten her freedom. Lucas left prepared. He'd already found an apartment, nothing fancy, but clean and close to the kids' school. He'd already set up the second bedroom for them, bought furniture that was sturdy rather than stylish. He'd already talked to his boss about flexible hours. He'd already informed his parents, calmly and without drama, and they'd simply nodded and asked what he needed. The night after the divorce was finalized, Lucas sat in his new apartment and felt something he hadn't felt in years: relief. Not happiness, exactly. The situation was sad. His kids would grow up in 2 households now, shuttling back and forth, learning too young that sometimes love wasn't enough. But relief, yes. Relief that he no longer had to manage Vanessa's dissatisfaction alongside everything else. Relief that he could stop trying to meet expectations that shifted every time he got close. Relief that his life could be his own again. He made himself dinner. Nothing elaborate, just pasta and sauce from a jar. He ate it standing at the counter, looking out the window at the parking lot below, and thought about what came next. He'd been through hard things before. He'd weathered his father's injury, his mother's health scare, lean years when the company had cut bonuses and he'd had to stretch every dollar. He knew how to endure. More than that, he knew how to build something solid from whatever materials he had. Vanessa thought he was settling. Lucas knew he was surviving, and there was value in that, whether she could see it or not. Preston Keene drove a BMW and talked about investment opportunities the way some people talked about sports. Vanessa had met him at a networking event her office had encouraged her to attend. One of those evenings with wine and cheese cubes where people exchanged business cards and pretended their small talk meant something. Preston had approached her with confidence that felt like validation, asked her questions that made her feel interesting, and within 3 weeks they were seeing each other regularly. He lived in Birmingham, Michigan, in a condo with granite countertops and a view of a courtyard that looked nice in photos. He wore cologne that smelled expensive and took her to restaurants with names she couldn't pronounce. When she told him about Lucas, about feeling trapped in a life too small for her ambitions. Preston nodded with understanding. "You deserve more," he told her, and Vanessa had believed him absolutely. They married 4 months after her divorce was finalized. The wedding was small, held at a boutique venue with Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood. Vanessa's sister came, of course, already evaluating Preston with the kind of scrutiny she applied to all of Vanessa's choices. Her mother wore a hat and took photos for Facebook. Lucas wasn't invited, naturally, though Vanessa wondered briefly if he even cared. The kids were there, awkward in their formal clothes, not quite understanding what this meant for their lives. Preston smiled for every photo. At first, the marriage felt like vindication. Vanessa moved into Preston's condo, leaving the 2-story house in Harrison Township for Lucas to figure out. Except he didn't keep it, she learned later. He'd moved to some modest apartment, taking only what he needed, which somehow annoyed her even though she couldn't articulate why. Life with Preston was different. They went to wine tastings. They attended charity galas. He introduced her to his friends, people with titles that sounded impressive until Vanessa realized most of them were in the same kind of debt Preston was. Because Preston, as it turned out, wasn't wealthy. He was leveraged. The BMW was leased. The condo was mortgaged beyond its value. The investments he talked about so confidently were speculative at best, reckless at worst. Preston didn't have money. He had credit, and he spent it freely, convinced that prosperity was something you could manifest through appearance alone. Vanessa didn't realize the depth of it until her mother called 6 months into the marriage. "We need help," her mother said, her voice tight with the kind of pride that came before a fall. "Your father's medical bills. The insurance isn't covering what we thought." "How much?" Vanessa asked, already doing math in her head. The kind of math she'd gotten used to doing again, despite Preston's assurances that money wouldn't be a problem. $8,000. Vanessa's stomach dropped. She looked across the living room, where Preston sat scrolling through his phone, wearing cashmere sweatpants that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. That evening, she brought it up. "My parents need help," she said, trying to sound casual, as if this were the kind of thing couples handled together. "Medical bills. I was thinking we could." "That's not really our responsibility," Preston said, not looking up from his phone. Vanessa blinked. "What?" "Your parents' bills," he clarified, finally meeting her eyes. "They're not our responsibility. They're adults. They need to figure it out." "It's $8,000, Vanessa said, something cold creeping up her spine. "They can't afford it." Preston shrugged. "Can we?" "Vanessa, we're building something here. We can't keep bailing out people who didn't plan properly." The words hung in the air between them. Vanessa thought about calling Lucas, about how when her father had struggled before, a fact she'd only learned recently, Lucas had simply written a check and never mentioned it. She thought about the difference between someone who helped quietly and someone who philosophized about responsibility while wearing $300 sweatpants. She didn't call Lucas, but she didn't give her mother the $8,000 either. She told her parents she'd see what she could do, made vague promises about talking to Preston again, and eventually her father worked out a payment plan with a hospital that would take him 5 years to complete. Her mother never quite forgave her. 2 months later, Vanessa's sister needed help. Her regular babysitter had quit, and she had a work conference, 3 days good for her career, but her husband was traveling and she needed someone to watch the kids. "Can you take them?" she'd asked Vanessa. "Just 3 days. They're easy." Vanessa had agreed immediately. She liked her nieces, and it seemed like a small thing. When she mentioned it to Preston, his response was immediate and sharp. 3 days? "Vanessa, we have plans. That dinner with the Richardsons, remember?" "Can't we reschedule?" she asked. "No," Preston said firmly. "This is networking. It's important. Your sister needs to figure out her own childcare. It's not your job to drop everything because she didn't plan ahead." "It's 3 days," Vanessa said, hearing her voice rise slightly. "And it sets a precedent," Preston replied, his tone maddeningly calm. "If you do it once, they'll keep asking. Family has to respect boundaries." In the end, Vanessa called her sister and made excuses. "Work project. Prior commitment. Can't make it work." Her sister said she understood, but her voice carried a chill that Vanessa recognized. It was the same tone she'd used years ago when Vanessa had stopped attending their parents' Sunday dinners, when she'd started finding reasons to miss family events. Preston didn't believe in family. Not in the way Lucas's family understood it, the way Vanessa had once pretended to tolerate. Preston believed in networking, in strategic relationships, in investing time only where it provided clear returns. And Vanessa realized, slowly and with growing unease, that she'd traded one kind of life for another. She wanted more, yes, but she was getting less in ways she hadn't anticipated. At the condo, there were no casseroles when she got sick. No one called just to check in. No one showed up to help hang pictures or move furniture. Preston had friends, but they were transactional. People he saw at events, not people he called when things got hard. Vanessa thought about Lucas's parents, about Marla bringing soup when the kids were sick, about his father helping fix the fence without being asked. She pushed the thoughts away. This was better, she told herself. This was the life she'd chosen, the life she deserved. But late at night, when Preston was asleep beside her and the condo felt sterile despite its expensive furniture, Vanessa sometimes wondered if deserving something and actually wanting it were the same thing. The unraveling happened so gradually that Vanessa almost didn't notice. Lucas's family didn't make announcements. They didn't send angry messages or make dramatic gestures. They simply withdrew. It started with Lucas's mother. Marla had always been the kind of woman who stayed in touch. Birthday cards that arrived exactly on time. Phone calls just to chat. Offers to watch the kids when Vanessa needed help. After the divorce, those things continued for a while. Marla would call to coordinate pickups and drop-offs for the children. She'd send polite text messages. But when Vanessa called asking if Marla could watch the kids for a weekend, Preston had planned a surprise trip, and Vanessa's custody schedule didn't align. Marla's response was different. "I'm sorry, but that doesn't work for us," Marla said, her voice pleasant but final. "It's just one weekend," Vanessa pressed. "I know Lucas has them next week, but this trip is important and—" "That's between you and Lucas," Marla interrupted gently. "I'm sure you two can figure something out." The call ended shortly after. No long explanation. No guilt trip. Just a boundary where there hadn't been one before. Vanessa tried Julie next, Lucas's sister. They'd never been close, but Julie had always been civil, even helpful when Vanessa needed a favor. "Hey, Julie, I know this is last minute, but I was wondering if you could—" "No," Julie said simply. "You don't even know what I'm asking." "Doesn't matter," Julie replied, her tone matter of fact. "Whatever it is, the answer's no. You made your choices, Vanessa. Live with them." The line went dead. Vanessa sat in her car outside the grocery store, staring at her phone, something bitter rising in her throat. She'd expected anger from Lucas's family, shouting, accusations, drama. Instead, they'd given her something worse, indifference. They'd closed ranks around Lucas, not out of spite, but out of loyalty. And in doing so, they'd quietly removed the safety net Vanessa had been relying on without quite realizing it. Then her own family started pulling away. Her mother's calls became less frequent. When they did talk, the conversations felt strained, filled with pointed silences and comments about how nice it must be to live in Birmingham with someone who seemed so successful. The subtext was clear. Vanessa could afford to help now. So why wasn't she? Her sister stopped inviting her to family gatherings. Not explicitly. She still got the courtesy text. But the invitations came later, after plans were already set, with the clear implication that her attendance was optional, perhaps unwanted. At a family birthday party for one of her nieces, Vanessa made a point of attending to prove she still cared. Her mother made a comment that sliced through the pleasantries. "It's so nice when people show up," Marla said, arranging plates on the kitchen counter. "Consistency matters, especially to children." "I'm here," Vanessa said defensively. "Now you are," her mother replied. "Where were you last month?" "Well, the month before." Vanessa wanted to explain about Preston's schedule, about their plans, about building a new life. But the words felt hollow even before she said them. Her mother looked at her with something that wasn't quite disappointment, more like resignation. "Your sister needed you. Your father needed you. We all needed you, and you chose him. Preston is my husband. Lucas was your husband, her mother said quietly. And he showed up even when it wasn't convenient. Vanessa left early, anger burning in her chest. But beneath the anger was something else, the growing awareness that she'd miscalculated badly. She'd assumed family was something that endured by default, that people would always be there because blood demanded it. She hadn't considered that relationships required maintenance, that showing up mattered, that helping when it was inconvenient was how you proved you valued people. Lucas had understood that instinctively. Vanessa was learning it too late. The isolation crept in slowly. Phone calls that went unanswered. Text messages that got short, delayed responses. Invitations that stopped coming. The quiet, steady withdrawal of people who decided she wasn't worth the effort anymore. At the condo with Preston, Vanessa tried to build a new social circle. His friends, mostly. They were pleasant enough, but every interaction felt performative. Dinners where people talked about their careers more than their lives. Conversations that ended the moment everyone went home. No one brought casseroles. No one called just to talk. No one showed up when things got hard. And things were getting hard. Preston's income, Vanessa was learning, was volatile. Some months were good. Some were tight. He hit it well, maintaining appearances, but Vanessa had started looking at their bank statements. The numbers told a story Preston's confident demeanor contradicted. She thought about Lucas's steady paycheck, his careful budgeting, the way he made sure things were always covered. She thought about his family's quiet generosity, the way they'd absorbed problems without fanfare. She thought about everything she'd had and failed to value. And she understood, with cold certainty, that karma wasn't punishment. It wasn't some cosmic revenge. It was simply the natural consequence of her choices catching up with her. The hardest part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the loneliness. It was watching her children notice. Emma was 10 now, perceptive in the way girls that age often are. She'd inherited Lucas's quiet observation skills, his tendency to watch and assess before speaking. Jake was 8, more outwardly emotional, quicker to show what he felt. They spent alternating weeks between households, and Vanessa had convinced herself the transition would be smooth. Children are resilient, everyone said. They adapted, but they were also honest in ways that cut deeper than any adult criticism. It was Jake who said it first. They were in the car, driving back from school on a Wednesday afternoon. Traffic crawled through Birmingham, and Vanessa was stressed about getting home in time to prepare dinner before Preston arrived. He'd been irritable lately, and she'd learned that having food ready smoothed things over. Why is Dad always calm? Jake asked from the back seat. Vanessa glanced in the rearview mirror. What do you mean? I mean, he's just calm. Even when we mess up or things go wrong. He just fixes it. Your father's always been like that, Vanessa said, trying to keep her voice neutral. And you're always stressed. Jake continued with the brutal honesty of children. Even when nothing's wrong, you're just stressed all the time. Emma shot her brother a look that said, shut up, but the damage was done. Vanessa gripped the steering wheel tighter. I'm not always stressed. Yeah, you are, Jake said matter of fact. Preston, too. You guys are stressed about money and work and everything. Dad's not. Your father has different circumstances, Vanessa said, hating how defensive she sounded. What does that mean? It means his life is simpler. Simpler sounds better, Jake said. That night, after the kids were in bed, Vanessa sat in the living room and let that conversation replay in her head. Simpler sounds better, coming from an 8-year-old who didn't understand economics or ambition or the difference between existing and actually living. But he understood stress. He understood atmosphere. He understood that one house felt tense and the other didn't. Emma's observations came differently, quieter, more calculated. One morning, while Vanessa was rushing to get ready for work, Emma appeared in the bathroom doorway. Dad said I can try out for soccer, she said. That's nice, Vanessa replied, applying mascara with quick, practice strokes. He's going to coach. Of course he is, Vanessa muttered. What does that mean? Vanessa set down the mascara and turned to face her daughter. Nothing, honey. It's great that he's coaching. You never come to my games, Emma said, her voice carefully neutral. I have work, Em. You know that. Dad has work too. He comes. Your father's job is more flexible. Or maybe he just wants to be there more than you do, Emma said, and walked away before Vanessa could respond. The comment stayed with Vanessa for days. Not because it was cruel. Emma hadn't said it with malice, but because it was true. Lucas prioritized attendance. He rearranged his schedule, left work early, made it happen. Vanessa made excuses. Preston never attended the kids' events. When Vanessa brought it up, his response was consistent. They're not my children. I shouldn't have to pretend. At least he was honest about it. The differences between households became more apparent as time passed. Emma started keeping lists in her head, comparing things without meaning to. At Dad's apartment, rules were consistent. Bedtime was bedtime. Homework got done before screen time. Dinner happened at the table, and they talked about their days. Grandma Marla visited sometimes, bringing cookies she'd baked. Their cousins came over to play. At Mom's condo, rules shifted depending on Preston's mood. Sometimes dinner was takeout eaten in front of the TV. Sometimes they couldn't make noise because Preston was on a work call. The visits felt tense, like they were guests rather than family. Jake was more vocal about his preference. I want to live with Dad, he announced one evening after a particularly tense dinner where Preston had snapped at him for using his phone at the table. You live with both of us, Vanessa said, her voice strained. But I want to live with Dad more. Preston looked up from his own phone, his expression annoyed. Kid, life doesn't always give you what you want. Preston, Vanessa said sharply. What? He needs to learn that. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Vanessa confronted him. You could be kinder to them, she said. I'm not their father, Preston replied, pouring himself whiskey in a glass he claimed was crystal but probably wasn't. I didn't sign up for the full parenting experience. You married their mother. I married you, he corrected. The kids were part of the package, and I've been tolerant. But don't expect me to suddenly become Dad of the Year. Vanessa stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching him sip his drink, and felt something fundamental break inside her. This was what she'd chosen. This was the life she'd said was better. The next week, when the kids went back to Lucas's apartment, Emma texted her a photo. It showed their dad helping Jake with homework at the kitchen table, both of them laughing about something. The text that accompanied it was simple. Dad says hi. Vanessa stared at that photo for a long time. In it, she could see everything she'd walked away from. The stability, the patience, the genuine presence. Lucas wasn't exciting. He wasn't ambitious in ways that impressed strangers. He didn't drive a leased BMW or wear expensive cologne, but he was there, consistently, reliably, unapologetically there. And her children saw it. They felt the difference between someone who showed up because he wanted to and someone who barely tolerated their existence. Preston's marriage began to crack under the weight of ordinary life within a year. He'd promised adventure and excitement, but what he delivered was inconsistency and emotional distance. When money got tight, his charm evaporated. When stress mounted, he withdrew. When Vanessa needed support, he offered philosophy instead of help. The fights became frequent, not dramatic explosions. Preston was too control for that, but cold, cutting exchanges that left Vanessa feeling small. This isn't what I expected, he told her one night. What did you expect? Vanessa asked, exhausted. I don't know. Not this. Not kids and drama and responsibilities I didn't create. You knew I had children when we met. Knowing and living with it are different things, Preston said. I'm not cut out for this domestic life. Vanessa almost laughed. Domestic life. He made it sound suffocating. But domestic life was what Lucas had mastered. The unglamorous work of showing up, of being present, of building something that lasted. She called it boring. Now she called it stability, and she traded it for this. Preston moved out on a Tuesday in November. There was no big confrontation, no dramatic scene. He packed his expensive clothes, his carefully curated possessions, and left with the same casual confidence he'd arrived with. The lease on the condo was in both their names, but he informed Vanessa that he'd stop paying his half starting next month. You wanted this life, he said as he loaded the last box into his BMW. It's yours. Vanessa stood in the parking lot, cold wind cutting through her jacket, and watched him drive away. She fell numb. Not heartbroken exactly. Her marriage to Preston had died slowly enough that its official end felt more like acknowledgement than loss, but hollow. The condo was too expensive for her alone. She'd have to move. Again, find something smaller, cheaper, more realistic. The word Lucas would use. Her mother didn't offer to help. Her sister sent a brief text, "Sorry to hear. Let me know if you need anything." But the offer felt perfunctory, the kind of thing you say without expecting follow-through. Vanessa spent that first week alone handling the logistics of her second failed marriage. Calling the landlord, sorting through bills, figuring out what she could afford and where she'd go. She lasted 9 days before she called Lucas. She didn't plan it. She was sitting on the couch in the condo's living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life she'd tried to build, and his number was still in her phone. Her fingers moved before her brain could talk her out of it. The phone rang 3 times. For a moment, she hoped he wouldn't answer, that she could hang up and pretend this moment of weakness never happened. Then Vanessa. His voice was exactly the same. Calm, measured, no inflection to indicate whether he was surprised or annoyed or indifferent to her call. "Lucas," she said. Her throat felt tight. Sorry to bother you. What do you need?" Not hostile, just direct. "I don't need money," she said quickly, needing him to understand that she wasn't calling to beg. "Preston and we're done, and I'm trying to figure some things out. I just thought, maybe you could give me some guidance on what to do next." Silence on the other end. Vanessa could hear background noise, music playing faintly, the sound of water running. He was doing dishes, probably, living his ordinary, stable life. "What kind of guidance?" he asked finally. "I don't know," Vanessa admitted. "You always knew how to handle things. Budget plans, logistics. I'm overwhelmed." More silence. Vanessa could picture him standing in his modest apartment kitchen, dish towel in hand, considering her request with the same methodical care he applied to everything. "I can't do that anymore," Lucas said. The words landed with quiet finality. "Lucas, I'm not asking for us to." "I know what you're asking," he interrupted, still calm, still measured. "You're asking me to help you manage your life the way I used to be your safety net. And I'm telling you I can't do that." "Why not?" The question came out more desperate than she'd intended. "Because you chose a different life," Lucas said simply. "You made it very clear that what I offered wasn't enough. That my family embarrassed you. That my way of living was settling. Remember?" Vanessa closed her eyes. "I was wrong." "Maybe," Lucas agreed. "But that doesn't change anything. I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back," Vanessa said, hearing her voice crack slightly. "I'm just asking for help. I help the people in my life," Lucas replied. "You're not in my life anymore, Vanessa. You're the mother of my children, and I'll always respect that. We'll coordinate about Emma and Jake. We'll be civil at their events. But I'm not your support system. I stayed and built my life. You need to do the same with yours." The words weren't cruel. That was almost worse. They were just honest, delivered with the same straightforward clarity Lucas had always possessed. "I understand," Vanessa said quietly. "Good luck," Lucas said, and there was something almost kind to his tone. "I mean that." The line went dead. Vanessa sat in the silent condo, phone still pressed to her ear, and felt the full weight of what she'd lost settle over her. Lucas had always been there, even when she didn't deserve it. Even when she took him for granted, he'd been the steady presence that kept things functioning. And now he was gone. Not in the dramatic way Preston had left, but in a more permanent way. He'd made himself unavailable to her. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. And she had no right to ask him to change his mind. The custody modification hearing happened 6 months later. Vanessa had moved to a smaller apartment in Royal Oak, something she could actually afford on her receptionist salary. The condo had gone back to the landlord. Most of Preston's furniture had been repossessed. She'd started over with second-hand pieces and the stark realization that her financial situation was more precarious than she'd ever admitted. The hearing wasn't Lucas's idea. Emma had asked if she could live with her dad full-time. She was 11 now, old enough that the court would consider her preference. Jake had echoed his sister's request. They wanted to stay at their dad's apartment, visit their mom on weekends instead of alternating weeks. Vanessa's lawyer had tried to prepare her for this possibility. "The kids are old enough to have a voice," she'd said, "and their father has been extremely stable. Do you have evidence of any issues with his parenting?" "No," Vanessa had admitted. He's a good father. Then I need to be honest with you. The judge will likely consider their preference seriously. The courtroom was smaller than Vanessa expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, a sense of institutional indifference to the personal dramas that played out here daily. Lucas sat with his lawyer at one table, Vanessa at another. He looked the same, maybe slightly grayer at the temples, but otherwise unchanged. He wore a button-down shirt and khakis, the same kind of outfit he'd worn to every important event during their marriage. Nothing flashy, nothing meant to impress. The judge reviewed the case file, asked questions about both households, and then called the children in. Watching Emma and Jake walk into the courtroom broke something in Vanessa she didn't know was still intact. They looked so small in that formal setting, so serious. The judge spoke to them gently, asking about school, activities, their relationships with both parents. "And where would you prefer to live primarily?" the judge asked Emma. Emma glanced at Vanessa, and in that look, Vanessa saw apology and determination in equal measure. "With my dad," Emma said clearly. "No offense to Mom, but Dad's place feels more stable. He's always there. He knows our schedules. He helps with homework. He comes to everything. And you, Jake?" "Same," Jake said, his voice quieter but no less certain. "Dad's is home. Mom's is, I don't know. It doesn't feel the same." The judge nodded, made notes, dismissed the children. Then she addressed both Vanessa and Lucas directly. "I've reviewed both households," she said. "Mr. Hartman, you've maintained consistent employment, stable housing, and active involvement in your children's education and activities. Ms. Keene, you've experienced some instability over the past year. 2 moves, a second divorce, variable work hours." Vanessa felt each observation like a physical blow. "I'm not making judgments about your character," the judge continued. "I'm assessing what serves the children's best interests. And based on their clear preference and the evidence presented, I'm modifying the custody arrangement. Primary physical custody will go to Mr. Hartman. Ms. Keene will have the children every other weekend and 1 evening per week." The gavel came down. Vanessa sat frozen. She'd expected this outcome, but having it formally declared made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Lucas stood, shook his lawyer's hand, and walked toward the exit. He paused at Vanessa's table. "I'm not celebrating this," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I know it's hard, but they need stability more than they need equality." Vanessa looked up at him, this man she'd left because he wasn't enough, and saw herself clearly for the first time through the court's eyes. Not as ambitious, not as someone who'd chosen to pursue more, but as unstable, as the parent who'd prioritized everything except her children's actual needs. "I'll make it work," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Lucas nodded once and left. Vanessa remained seated long after everyone else had gone, staring at the empty courtroom, understanding what karma really meant. It wasn't punishment from the universe. It was consequence. Pure, simple consequence. She'd made choices. The world had responded accordingly. And no amount of regret would reverse the momentum of those choices. 3 years later, Vanessa lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Ferndale. She'd settled into a routine that felt neither happy nor miserable, just real. She worked at a different medical office now, slightly better pay, more reasonable hours. She drove a used Honda that ran reliably. She paid her bills on time because she'd learned, finally, that stability wasn't optional. Every other weekend, Emma and Jake came to stay. She'd set up an air mattress in the living room for them, made the space as comfortable as she could with limited resources. They were 14 and 12 now, growing into teenagers who needed her differently than they had as children. Emma was in middle school, already thinking about high school and college. Jake had joined a basketball team at school. They told her about their lives during their weekend visits, and Vanessa listened, asked questions, showed up in the small ways she could. She attended their events when her schedule allowed. Basketball games, school concerts, parent-teacher conferences. Lucas was always there too. They developed a cordial distance, polite and functional. They didn't talk beyond coordinating schedules and discussing the kids' needs. Vanessa had stopped expecting anything else from him. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Lucas was seeing someone, a teacher named Beth who coached at the same school where Lucas volunteered. They'd been together for over a year. Serious, but moving slowly. Lucas's family had apparently welcomed her warmly. The news had stung at first. Then Vanessa realized she had no right to that sting. On a Saturday in October, Vanessa found herself driving past the old neighborhood in Harrison Township. She hadn't planned it. She'd been running errands, and the route just took her there. She drove slowly down Lucas's parents' street, though she had no intention of stopping. The trees had changed color, brilliant reds and golds against the gray sky. The lake in the distance reflected the autumn light. Lucas's parents' house looked the same. Cars filled the driveway. His sister's minivan, a truck she didn't recognize, Lucas's reliable sedan. Through the front window, Vanessa could see people moving around inside. A birthday celebration, maybe, or just a regular family dinner. As she slowed to a crawl, the front door opened. Emma and Jake ran out first, laughing about something, followed by Lucas and a woman with dark hair, who must have been Beth. She was pretty in an understated way, wearing jeans and a sweater, her hand resting easily in Lucas's. Marla appeared in the doorway, calling something to the kids that made them turn around and come back for hugs. Lucas's father stood beside her, slightly stooped now, but smiling. It was such an ordinary scene. No drama, no grand gestures. Just family gathering on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of gathering that happened every weekend across the country. But Vanessa understood what she was seeing, the life she'd walked away from, continuing without her. They hadn't needed to replace her. They'd simply closed the gap she'd left and kept going. Emma spotted Vanessa's car and waved, a simple gesture of acknowledgement. Vanessa waved back, then drove on before anyone else noticed her. That night, alone in her apartment, Vanessa thought about karma. She'd expected it to be dramatic, some cosmic revenge for leaving Lucas, for chasing Preston, for prioritizing ambition over substance. She'd expected to be punished in obvious ways. Instead, karma had been quiet. It was living smaller because she'd burned through resources chasing bigger. It was sitting alone on weekends because she'd pushed away everyone who'd offered genuine connection. It was watching her children thrive in the stability she'd once scorned. It was knowing that Lucas had built something lasting while she'd built nothing at all. The punishment wasn't in any single moment. It was in every moment, every quiet evening alone, every event she attended as an outsider, every conversation with her children where they talked about home and meant their dad's apartment. She hadn't lost Lucas because he wasn't enough. She lost him because she couldn't see the value of what she already had. And that was the lesson that stayed with her, unforgiving and permanent. Not the kind you learned once and moved past. The kind that sat beside you every day, reminding you what you traded for what, and what the actual cost had been. Vanessa turned off the lights in her small apartment and went to bed. Tomorrow she'd work. She'd pay her bills. She'd answer her children's texts. She'd live the life she'd created through 1,000 small choices that had felt justified at the time. And she'd understand, as she had for 3 years and would for the rest of her life, that some losses weren't temporary. Some losses were permanent. Not because the world was cruel, but because it was fair. She'd made her choices. Now she lived with them.